Clara's hands trembled as she folded her last dress into the worn leather valise. Behind her, the dining room still echoed with the cruel words that had shattered her world just an hour ago. Her mother-in-law had announced to 12 guests that Clara was defective, broken, a waste of her son's best years, and Edmund, her husband of 5 years, had simply stared at his plate and said nothing. Now Clara stood at the bedroom door, wedding ring placed deliberately on the dresser, and whispered to herself, "I am done being someone's disappointment." If you want to follow Clara's journey to find where she truly belongs, subscribe to my channel and stay until the very end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I can't wait to see how far this story travels. Clara walked out of the Harwell mansion on the hottest day of June 1878, carrying nothing but a single valise and whatever dignity she had left. The Missouri sun beat down on her shoulders as she made her way toward the train station, each step taking her further from the life she had tried so desperately to build for 5 long years. Her boots clicked against the wooden sidewalk, and she kept her eyes straight ahead, refusing to look back at the house that had become her prison. Mrs. Harwell. The voice belonged to Margaret, the housemaid, who had been kind to her when no one else bothered. Clara stopped but didn't turn around. "Mrs. Harwell, please, where will you go?" Clara finally looked over her shoulder. Margaret stood on the porch, her apron twisted in her hands. "Anywhere but here," Clara said. "And it's Miss Whitmore now. I reckon I never should have changed my name in the first place." She kept walking. The train station was crowded with travelers heading west, families seeking new lives in territories that promised land and opportunity. Clara purchased a ticket to Laramie, Wyoming territory, not because she knew anyone there, but because it was the furthest destination she could afford. As she waited on the platform, the events of last night played through her mind like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. It had started as another Sunday dinner at the Harwell estate. Harriet Edmund's mother had gathered the entire family under the pretense of celebrating the beginning of summer. Clara had spent 3 days preparing, making sure every detail was perfect, hoping that somehow this dinner would be different. She had been wrong. The meal was halfway through when Harriet set down her fork with that deliberate click Clara had come to dread. "I've been thinking." Harriet had announced to the table of 12 relatives about Edmund's future, about what this family deserves. Clara's stomach had clenched. She knew that tone. She knew what was coming. 5 years. Harriet continued, her voice carrying the weight of accusation. 5 years and still no heir. No son to carry the Harwell name. No grandchild for me to hold. Clara's hands had gone cold in her lap. Across the table, Edmund's Aunt Prudence looked down at her plate. His cousin William coughed uncomfortably, but no one spoke. No one ever spoke against Harriet. "I've consulted with Dr. Morrison," Harriet went on. "He says some women are simply incapable, defective, if you will, built wrong on the inside." Clara's voice had come out steadier than she felt. "Dr. Morrison has never examined me." "He didn't need to, dear." Harriet's smile was sharp as broken glass. 5 years tells its own story. My son deserves a real family. He deserves sons to inherit what his father built. And you—" She paused, letting the silence twist like a knife. "You are wasting his best years." Clara had looked at Edmund then, her husband of 5 years, the man she had loved with every piece of her young heart, the man she had trusted to stand beside her through anything. Edmund stared at his mashed potatoes like they held the secrets of the universe. "Edmund," Clara had whispered, "say something." He didn't look up. His fork scraped against his plate, and still he said nothing. "My son knows I speak the truth," Harriet said. "Don't you, Edmund?" And then the words that ended everything. Edmund cleared his throat and mumbled, "Mother isn't wrong, Clara. We need to discuss our options." The table had fallen silent. Every eye turned to Clara, waiting to see how she would crumble, waiting for the tears they expected. But Clara didn't cry. Something inside her, Something that had been bending for 5 years under the weight of their disappointment finally snapped clean through. Not in half. Just free. She had placed her napkin on the table with careful precision, pushed back her chair, and stood. "Excuse me," she had said, her voice steady as stone. "I find I've lost my appetite." She walked to the bedroom she had shared with Edmund for 5 years, pulled out her valise and began to pack. She moved with a calm that surprised even herself, folding each dress, each memory, each broken promise into that leather case. Edmund had appeared in the doorway 15 minutes later. "Clara, be reasonable." She didn't stop packing. "I am being reasonable for the first time in 5 years. Where will you even go? You have nothing without me, without this family." Clara paused then, holding a shawl her mother had given her on her wedding day. She looked at the man she had married, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. "I had nothing with you, Edmund. I just didn't realize it until tonight." My mother spoke harshly, but she wasn't wrong. We need to think about the future, about what's best for everyone. Everyone? Clara's laugh held no humor. "You mean what's best for you and your mother? Tell me, Edmund, did you ever defend me even once, when she called me damaged, when she told your aunts I must have done something sinful to deserve an empty womb, when she suggested you find comfort elsewhere? Did you ever say one word in my defense?" Edmund's silence was her answer. Clara nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." She closed her valise and lifted her wedding ring from her finger. The gold band sat on the dresser between them, catching the lamplight. "Goodbye, Edmund." "You're being dramatic. Where will you go? Your parents won't take you back. A divorced woman in their house. The scandal alone. That's not your concern anymore." She had walked past him, past the dining room, where she could still hear the murmur of conversation, past the front door she had entered as a hopeful bride 5 years ago, and out into the night. Now standing on the train platform in the harsh light of day, Clara felt the reality of her situation settling in. She had $23 to her name, a few dresses, and a letter from her mother that had arrived 2 weeks ago. The letter mentioned a rancher near Laramie who needed household help, a widower with a young nephew to care for. Her mother had written the name and address, probably never expecting Clara would actually use it. Josiah Callahan, the Callahan Ranch. Clara read the name again as the train whistle announced its arrival. She had no idea what kind of man Josiah Callahan was. She didn't know if he would hire a woman with no references, no recommendations, nothing but desperation and a willingness to work. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would rather scrub floors for a stranger than spend one more day being told she was worthless. The journey to Wyoming took 3 days. Clara changed trains twice, ate sparingly from the food she had packed, and spoke to no one unless necessary. The further west she traveled, the more the landscape changed. The green hills of Missouri gave way to endless prairie, then to the rugged terrain of Wyoming territory. When she finally stepped off the train in Laramie, the wind hit her like a wall, hot and dry, carrying the scent of dust and sage. This was nothing like Missouri. The livery stable owner agreed to take her out to the Callahan Ranch for $2. It was robbery, but Clara had no choice. "Callahan Place is about 15 miles out," the man said as he hitched up a wagon. "Good spread. Joe Callahan's a fair man. Keeps to himself mostly since his wife passed." His wife, Sarah, died in childbirth 3 years back. Baby didn't make it neither. The man shook his head. "Damn shame. Joe ain't been the same since." Clara absorbed this information in silence. A widower. A man who had also lost the possibility of the family he expected. In some ways, they had both been denied the futures they planned for. The ride to the ranch was long and dusty. By the time the wagon rolled through the gates of the Callahan property, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. The ranch was larger than Clara had expected. Well-tended fences stretched toward the horizon and cattle dotted the distant hills. The main house was built of sturdy timber with a wraparound porch and stone steps that spoke of permanence. This was a place built to last. A man emerged from the barn as the wagon pulled up. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of years of physical labor. His shirt was dusty from work, and his boots had clearly seen more earth than polish. He walked toward the wagon with the steady, unhurried gait of a man who owned everything his eyes could see. "Help you." His voice was deep, direct, neither friendly nor unfriendly. "Mr. Callahan, I'm Clara Whitmore. My mother wrote to you about the housekeeper position." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes taking in her travel-worn dress, her dust-covered boots, her single valise. There was no judgment in his gaze, just assessment. "You Elizabeth Whitmore's daughter?" "Yes, sir." "She said you'd be coming." He paused. "Said you were a hard worker." "I am." "Know your way around a wood stove." "Learned on one. My daddy was a blacksmith." "Heat don't scare me, Mr. Callahan." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Ain't Mister around here. Just Joe." He jerked his chin toward the house. "Come on then. I'll show you to your room." Clara climbed down from the wagon, valise in hand, and followed him toward the house. As they walked, she noticed a small face watching from one of the windows. A boy no more than 8 years old, with dark hair and wary eyes. "That's Samuel," Joe said without turning around. "Goes by Sammy. My brother's boy. His folks passed from fever 2 years back. Lives with me now." "I'm sorry for your loss." Joe stopped walking. For a moment he stood perfectly still, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. "Lot of loss on this ranch, Miss Whitmore. Me, the boy, even old Hetty who does the laundry. We all carryin' something." He turned to face her. "You look like you're carrying something too." Clara met his eyes without flinching. "I am." "You want to talk about it?" "No." He nodded once as if this was the answer he expected. "Fair enough. Ain't my business anyway." He resumed walking. "Breakfast is before 5. Ranch work starts early. Boy needs someone to look after him proper. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Rooms at the back of the house. Small but clean. Wages paid every Saturday. We clear but clear." They reached the porch steps and Joe paused with his hand on the railing. "One more thing, Miss Whitmore. I don't know what happened to you before you came here, and like I said, ain't none of my business. But I want you to know something." He looked at her directly. "In this house, you're judged by what you do, not by what people say about you. We all get a fresh start here. Understood?" Clara felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't even realized she was holding tight. "Understood." Joe turned and went inside. Clara followed, stepping across the threshold, into a house that smelled of wood smoke and coffee, into a life she never planned but desperately needed. Behind her, the door closed on everything she had been. Ahead of her, a small boy watched from the kitchen doorway, a yellow dog pressed against his leg, waiting to see if this stranger was someone he could trust. Clara set down her valise, looked at the child who had lost everything, and understood with sudden clarity that she had not come here to escape her past. She had come here to find her purpose. The boy didn't come down for supper that first night. Clara had spent the afternoon familiarizing herself with the kitchen, finding flour in the pantry, eggs in the cold storage, coffee beans in a tin by the stove. She cooked a simple meal of biscuits, fried potatoes, and salt pork, setting 3 places at the long wooden table. Joe came in when the sun dipped below the horizon, washed his hands at the basin, and sat down without ceremony. "Boy ain't coming," he said, reaching for a biscuit. "Does this sometimes, when something's new. Hetty usually brings him a plate later." Clara nodded and sat across from him. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the occasional creak of the house settling. "These are good," Joe said, finally holding up half a biscuit. "Better than what I've been making." "Thank you." "Hetty's been trying to keep things running, but she's got her hands full with the outdoor work. Chickens, garden, laundry. Too much for one woman her age." I'm happy to help however I can. Joe studied her across the table. You always this agreeable? Clara set down her fork. No, but I'm grateful for the work, and I intend to earn my keep. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or just recognition. Fair enough. He finished his meal, thanked her for the food, and headed out to check on the cattle one more time before dark. Clara cleared the table, washed the dishes, and prepared a small plate for Sammy. She found his room at the end of the hallway door, cracked open just enough for her to see him sitting on the bed with the yellow dog curled at his feet. Clara knocked softly. Sammy, I brought you some supper. The boy didn't answer, but the dog's ears perked up. I'll leave it outside your door, Clara said, in case you get hungry later. She set the plate down and walked away. Behind her, she heard the door creak open, then close again quickly. It was a start. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn and had coffee brewing by the time Joe appeared in the kitchen. He nodded his approval, grabbed a cup, and headed out to start the day's work. Sammy appeared 20 minutes later, barefoot and silent, the yellow dog padding behind him. Good morning, Clara said, keeping her voice light. You hungry? The boy slid into a chair without answering. The dog settled at his feet, watching Clara with intelligent eyes. What's your dog's name? Sammy hesitated, then mumbled Biscuit. Biscuit. Clara smiled. That's a fine name. Does he like actual biscuits? The ghost of something flickered across the boy's face. Not quite a smile, but close. Sometimes. Clara broke off a small piece of biscuit and held it out. Biscuit looked at Sammy, waiting for permission. The boy gave a tiny nod, and the dog trotted over to accept the offering from Clara's hand. He don't usually take food from strangers. Sammy said, a note of surprise in his voice. Maybe he knows I'm not a stranger for long. Sammy considered this, then went back to eating his oatmeal. Progress. Hetty arrived mid-morning, a sturdy woman with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and hands that showed decades of hard work. She walked into the kitchen, took one look at Clara, and sniffed. So you're the new one. Clara Whitmore. I know who you are, Elizabeth's girl from Missouri. Hetty moved past her to check the stove. Last woman who took this job lasted 3 weeks, one before her 2 months. This ranch ain't easy living. I'm not looking for easy. Hetty turned her eyes sharp. What are you looking for? Clara held her gaze. A place where I can be useful. The older woman stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We'll see. She grabbed a basket and headed outside without another word. Clara watched her go, understanding that she had just been given a test. Whether she passed or failed remained to be seen. The first week was a blur of work. Clara threw herself into every task, rising before dawn and falling into bed exhausted each night. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, reorganized the pantry, and cooked 3 meals a day without complaint. Sammy watched her constantly, those wary eyes tracking her movements around the house. He didn't speak much, but he stopped hiding in his room. Each morning, he appeared at the breakfast table, Biscuit at his heels, and ate whatever Clara put in front of him. On the 5th day, he spoke more than 3 words to her for the first time. You make oatmeal different than Ruth did. Ruth, Clara had learned from Hetty, was the previous housekeeper who had left to care for a sick relative. Different good or different bad? Sammy shrugged. Just different. Ruth put too much water in it. Yours is better. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. Well, thank you for telling me. Uncle Joe says you came from Missouri. That's right. Why'd you come all the way out here? Clara considered the question carefully. This boy had lost his parents. He understood grief. She wouldn't insult him with a lie. I needed to start over, she said honestly. Sometimes the place you live stops being the place you belong. Sammy was quiet for a moment. Then softly. My ma used to say something like that. She said, home ain't a place, it's a feeling. Clara's throat tightened. Your ma sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. The boy looked down at his bowl. I miss her, And Pa, I miss them every single day. I know you do. Does it ever stop, the missing? Clara knelt beside his chair so she was at his eye level. No, honey, it doesn't stop. But it changes. Right now the missing feels like a storm inside you, doesn't it? Like it might sweep you away if you're not careful. Sammy nodded, his eyes glistening. One day, and I can't tell you when that storm will quiet down. It won't go away completely, but it'll turn into something softer, like rain instead of thunder, and you'll be able to carry it without it carrying you. The boy stared at her with an intensity that seemed far too old for 8 years. Promise. I promise. Sammy reached out and touched her hand just for a second before pulling back. Then he slid off his chair and ran outside, Biscuit racing after him. Clara stayed kneeling on the kitchen floor for a long moment, her heart aching for a child who understood loss better than any child should. That evening, Joe came in for supper and stopped short when he saw the table. Clara had found wildflowers growing near the garden and placed them in a jar as a centerpiece. It was a small thing, but the kitchen looked different, warmer. Flowers, Joe said, his voice unreadable. I hope you don't mind. I found them near the... Sarah used to do that. He walked to the table and touched one of the petals. Every week. Said a house needed color to feel like a home. Clara's stomach dropped. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I can remove them. No. Joe's voice was firm, but not unkind. Leave them. It's good to see them there again. He sat down heavily, still looking at the flowers. When he finally met her eyes, there was something vulnerable in his expression that Clara hadn't seen before. 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years since she passed, and I still expect to see her when I walk through that door. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. No, it doesn't. He picked up his fork, then set it down again. The baby was a boy. We were going to name him Thomas, after my father. Sometimes I think about what he would have looked like, if he would have had her eyes. Clara didn't offer empty condolences. She simply sat across from him and listened. People in town kept telling me I'd move on, Joe continued. Find another wife. Start again. Like Sarah and Thomas were just chapters I could close and forget. His jaw tightened. I stopped going to town after that. People don't understand grief until they live it. You understand it. It wasn't a question. Yes, Clara said. I do. Joe looked at her for a long moment. Maybe that's why the boy took to you so quick. He can tell. Kids always can. They ate the rest of the meal in a companionable silence that felt different from the awkward quiet of her first night. Something had shifted between them. Not romance, not yet. But understanding. Recognition. Two souls who knew what it meant to lose everything and keep breathing anyway. The second week brought an unexpected visitor. Clara was hanging laundry when a wagon rolled up the drive. The driver was a well-dressed man in his 40s, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a way of looking around the property that made Clara uneasy. Good morning, ma'am. He tipped his hat. Name's Victor Dalton. I'm looking for Mr. Callahan. He's in the far pasture. Won't be back until midday. Dalton's smile widened. That's all right. I can wait. Something about the way he said it made Clara's skin crawl. She dried her hands on her apron and stood straight. Can I tell him what this is regarding? Business matter. I've made Mr. Callahan several generous offers for this property. He's been reluctant to see reason, but I'm a patient man. Clara kept her expression neutral. I'll let him know you stopped by. Oh, I think I'll stick around. Dalton climbed down from his wagon and looked toward the house. Nice place. Must be hard for a man alone to manage all this, especially with a young boy to raise. The implied threat hung in the air between them. He's not alone, Clara said, her voice steady. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. She turned her back on him and continued hanging laundry, her heart pounding. She could feel Dalton watching her, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of showing fear. When Joe returned at noon, his face darkened at the sight of Dalton's wagon. "I thought I made myself clear last time," Joe said, dismounting from his horse. "Now, Joe, let's be reasonable." Dalton spread his hands in a gesture of false friendship. "The railroad's coming through this territory. My offer is more than fair. This land belonged to my father, his father before him. It ain't for sale. Everything's for sale for the right price." Joe stepped forward, his voice dropping low. "Get off my property, Dalton, and don't come back." Dalton's smile finally slipped. "You're making a mistake, Callahan. A man alone out here raising a boy that ain't even his own blood. Accidents happen. Cattle get sick. Fires start. Maybe you should think about what's best for that nephew of yours." Clara saw Joe's hands clench into fists at his sides. "You threatening my family?" "I'm just stating facts. This territory can be dangerous for folks who don't have protection." Joe moved so fast, Clara barely saw it. One moment he was standing by his horse. The next he had Dalton by the collar, lifting the smaller man onto his toes. "Listen carefully," Joe said, his voice deadly quiet. "You come near my land, my nephew, or anyone on this ranch again, and I'll forget I'm supposed to be a civilized man. We clear?" Dalton's face had gone pale. "Clear." Joe released him with a shove. Dalton stumbled back, brushing off his coat with trembling hands. "You'll regret this," he spat, climbing onto his wagon. "All of you will." He snapped the reins and drove away, dust rising behind him. Clara approached Joe slowly. "Who is that man?" "Victor Dalton. Owns half the businesses in town. Been trying to buy up every ranch in the territory for the past 2 years. Joe watched the wagon disappear down the road. "Most folks sold. Too tired to fight. But I ain't most folks." He threatened Sammy. Joe's expression hardened. "I know. And if he so much as looks at that boy wrong, I'll kill him myself." There was no bravado in his voice, no exaggeration, just cold, absolute truth. Clara believed him. That night she found Sammy sitting on the porch steps, Biscuit beside him. The boy was staring up at the stars. "Can't sleep?" Clara asked, settling down next to him. "Bad dreams." "About your parents?" Sammy shook his head. "About the man who came today. I heard what he said. About accidents." Clara's heart clenched. "You were listening." "I always listen. Grown-ups think kids don't pay attention, but we do. We hear everything." He looked at her, fear evident in his young eyes. "Is he going to hurt Uncle Joe?" "No," Clara said firmly. "Your uncle can take care of himself, and he would never let anything happen to you." "What about you?" The question caught Clara off guard. "What about me? Are you going to stay? Or are you going to leave like Ruth did? Like everyone does?" Clara thought about the question carefully. A week ago, she would have answered that she didn't know, that she was just here temporarily until she figured out her next move. But sitting on this porch with this frightened child looking at her with eyes that had already seen too much loss, Clara realized something had changed. "Sammy, I can't promise what the future holds. Nobody can. But I can promise you this: I'm not looking for a reason to leave. I'm looking for a reason to stay. And so far, I've found a few pretty good ones." "Like what?" "Like your uncle's terrible coffee. Someone's got to make sure he drinks something that doesn't taste like mud." Sammy's lips twitched. "It is pretty bad. And like Biscuit here, who needs someone to sneak him treats when nobody's looking." The dog's tail wagged at the sound of his name. "And like a certain young man who makes me want to be better than I was yesterday." Sammy was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "My ma used to say that we should try to be better than yesterday." "Then your ma and I would have gotten along just fine." The boy leaned slightly toward her, not quite touching, but close. It was the most trust he had shown her since she arrived. They sat together in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead until Sammy's eyes grew heavy and Clara guided him back to bed. When she passed the parlor on her way to her own room, she found Joe standing by the window, watching the dark horizon. "He's asleep," Clara said softly. Joe nodded without turning around. "Thank you for what you said to him." "You heard?" "I hear everything in this house. Walls are thin." He finally turned to face her. "What you told him about looking for reasons to stay, did you mean it?" Clara considered lying, considered protecting herself with vague words and careful distance. But something about this man, this house, this strange and broken family demanded honesty. "Yes," she said. "I meant it." Joe held her gaze for a long moment. Something passed between them, unspoken but unmistakable. "Good," he said finally. "Because this ranch could use someone worth staying for." He walked past her toward his room, and Clara stood alone in the darkened hallway, her heart beating faster than it had any right to. The following morning brought trouble of a different kind. Hetty came into the kitchen with a letter in her hand and a grim expression on her face. "This came with the supply wagon," she said, holding it out to Clara. "It's from Missouri." Clara's blood went cold. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope immediately. Edmund. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "Clara, Mother has been making inquiries. She knows you went to Wyoming Territory. She's already written to several families in Laramie telling them about your condition, your deficiency. She wants to make sure everyone knows what kind of woman they're harboring. I tried to stop her, but you know how she is. Come home. We can work this out. A quiet annulment, perhaps. There's no need for this scandal to follow you across the country." Edmund Clara read the letter twice, her vision blurring with rage and shame. Even here, even 1,000 miles away, Harriet Harwell was determined to destroy her. "Bad news?" Hetty asked, watching her carefully. Clara crumpled the letter in her fist. "My past is trying to catch up with me." "It usually does." The older woman paused. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Clara stared at the crumpled paper in her hand. She thought about running again. Finding another train, another town, another place where no one knew her name. But then she thought about Sammy's face when he asked if she was going to leave, about Joe's voice when he said the ranch could use someone worth staying for, about the family she was beginning to build here, fragile and new and full of possibility. She straightened her spine and threw the letter into the fire. "I'm going to stay," she said, "and I'm going to fight." Hetty watched the paper curl and blacken in the flames. Then, for the first time, she smiled. "Good, because I was starting to like having you around. Would have been a shame to break in another new girl." She turned and headed outside, leaving Clara alone in the kitchen, with the ashes of her old life settling in the fireplace. Outside, she could hear Sammy laughing at something, Biscuit barking in response. Clara wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders, and started preparing breakfast. The battle was just beginning. The gossip reached Laramie before Sunday. Clara found out when she went to town with Hetty to pick up supplies. The general store fell silent the moment she walked through the door. 3 women near the fabric counter turned to stare, their whispers dying on their lips like embers in a sudden wind. "Just ignore them," Hetty muttered, steering Clara toward the counter. "Small-town folk got nothing better to do than flap their gums." But Clara heard the words anyway. Barren, defective, cast out by her own husband's family. The shopkeeper, a thin man named Horace, looked at her with a mixture of pity and judgment that made Clara's stomach turn. "What can I get you ladies today?" His voice was pleasant enough, but his eyes kept darting to the women by the fabric, as if seeking their approval. Hetty slapped the supply list on the counter. "Same as always, Horace, and don't dawdle. We got work to do." As Horace gathered their supplies, one of the women approached. She was perhaps 50, with silver hair pinned beneath a proper bonnet and a dress that cost more than Clara had earned in a month back in Missouri. "You must be the new girl out at the Callahan place." Her smile was sharp. I'm Mrs. Gertrude Whitley. My husband owns the bank. Clara Whitmore. Oh, I know who you are, dear. Mrs. Whitley's eyes glittered. We've all been made quite aware of your situation. Such a tragedy, really. A woman unable to fulfill her most basic purpose. Clara felt her face flush, but she kept her voice steady. I don't believe we've met, Mrs. Whitley, so I'm curious how you came to know so much about me. Letters travel, dear, even from Missouri. The woman leaned closer. I do hope you're not getting any ideas about poor Mr. Callahan. That man has suffered enough without being saddled with damaged goods. Something inside Clara snapped. You're right, Mrs. Whitley. Letters do travel. And apparently, so does cruelty, though it seems to have found a comfortable home right here in Laramie. Mrs. Whitley's smile froze. I beg your pardon? You heard me. Clara stepped forward, and the banker's wife actually took a step back. You don't know a single thing about me except what a bitter old woman wrote in a letter. Yet here you are, passing judgment in a general store like it's Sunday sermon. Tell me, does that make you feel important? Does tearing down a stranger make your own life feel less empty? The store had gone completely silent. Horace stood frozen behind the counter, a bag of flour in his hands. Mrs. Whitley's face turned crimson. Well, I never... No, you probably haven't. Never had someone speak the truth to you. Never had to face consequence for your gossip. Clara grabbed the supplies Horace had gathered and placed coins on the counter. Good day, Mrs. Whitley. I hope whatever bitterness lives inside you finds its way out someday. Must be exhausting carrying all that around. She walked out of the store with her head high, Hetty following close behind. Once they were on the wagon and heading out of town, Hetty let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. That's the most excitement that store's seen since old Miller's mule got loose in the feed section. I shouldn't have said all that. Why not? Every word was true. Hetty shook her head. Gertrude Whitley's been ruling this town's social circle for 20 years. About time someone knocked her down a peg. It won't help my reputation any. Honey, your reputation was already shot the moment those letters arrived. Might as well go down fighting. Clara stared at the road ahead, her hands trembling with leftover anger. She had spent 5 years swallowing insults, bowing her head trying to be small enough to avoid Harriet's attacks. She was done with that now. She was done being small. When they returned to the ranch, Joe was waiting on the porch. His expression told Clara that news traveled even faster than wagons. Heard you had words with Gertrude Whitley. Clara set down the supplies. Word travels fast. Silas Brown was in town. Told me what happened. Joe's face was unreadable. Said you gave the old bat what for? Clara braced herself for disapproval. Joe needed good relations with the town. She had just made an enemy of the banker's wife. But then Joe did something unexpected. He smiled. It was small, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face. For a moment Clara saw the man he must have been before grief carved hollows in his cheeks and shadows in his eyes. Should have been there to see it, he said. Gertrude Whitley's needed someone to stand up to her for years. You're not angry. Angry. Joe shook his head. Woman came at you with poison and you gave her truth right back. That ain't something to be angry about. That's something to respect. He picked up the heaviest supply crate like it weighed nothing and headed inside. Clara stood on the porch, her heart beating strangely fast. Respect. He respected her. When was the last time a man had looked at her with respect, instead of disappointment? The next few days passed in a tense quiet. Clara knew the gossip was spreading, knew the town was talking. But within the walls of the ranch, life continued. Sammy had started following Clara around like a shadow. He helped her in the kitchen, asked her endless questions about cooking and baking, and showed her his collection of charcoal drawings. The boy had talent, real talent. His sketches of Biscuit of the horses of the ranch itself showed an eye for detail that surprised Clara. These are wonderful. she told him, examining a drawing of Joe on horseback. You captured your uncle perfectly. Sammy ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. Ma used to draw. She taught me before. Before she passed? He nodded. I don't want to forget. Drawing helps me remember. Clara set down the sketch and knelt to his level. Sammy, can I tell you something? Something important. The boy nodded solemnly. The people we love never really leave us. They live on in the things they taught us and the parts of ourselves they helped shape. Your ma taught you to draw to see beauty in ordinary things. Every time you pick up that charcoal, she's right there with you. Sammy's eyes glistened. You think so? I know so. The boy threw his arms around her neck, hugging her tight. Clara held him close, breathing in the scent of summer grass and childhood, and felt something crack open in her chest. This was what she had been missing. This was what Harriet and Edmund could never understand. Love wasn't about blood or biology. Love was about showing up day after day and choosing someone. Sammy pulled back, wiping his eyes. Miss Clara? Yes. I'm glad you came here. I'm glad Uncle Joe found you. Clara's throat tightened. I'm glad too, sweetheart. That night, after Sammy was in bed, Clara found Joe sitting on the porch alone. The summer air was warm, filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Mind if I join you? Joe gestured to the space beside him. Clara sat, leaving a careful distance between them. Boy's getting attached to you, Joe said after a while. Is that a problem? No. He was quiet for a moment. It's good for him. He needs someone gentle in his life, someone who understands. He's easy to love. Joe turned to look at her, and something in his expression made Clara's breath catch. Yes, he said softly. He is. They sat in silence, watching fireflies dance across the yard. When Joe spoke again, his voice was low. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. I might not answer. Fair enough. He paused. What your husband's family said about you. About not being able to have children. Is it true? Clara felt the familiar shame rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. This man had shared his grief with her. He deserved honesty in return. I don't know, she said. 5 years of marriage and no baby. His mother decided that meant I was defective. Maybe she was right. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Or maybe there was something wrong with him. Clara's head snapped toward Joe. What? Takes two to make a child. His voice was matter-of-fact. Maybe the problem wasn't you. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was just bad luck. Point is, you don't know. And neither did they. They seemed pretty certain. People are certain of a lot of things they got no right being certain about. Joe looked up at the stars. My Sarah, she was certain she'd survive the birth. Certain we'd watch our boy grow up together. Certainty don't mean a damn thing against reality. Clara absorbed his words in silence. What I'm trying to say, Joe continued, is that what happened or didn't happen in Missouri don't define you. Not here. Not to me. Then what does define me? Joe turned to face her fully. His eyes, usually so guarded, were open now. Vulnerable. The way you look at my nephew like he hung the moon. The way you stood up to Gertrude Whitley when most folks in this territory are too scared to look at her sideways. The way you work harder than any woman I've met without complaint, without expecting praise. He paused. The way you make this house feel like a home again. That's what defines you, Clara. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever seen her like this. Joe? You don't have to say anything. He stood looking down at her with an expression that was gentle and fierce all at once. Just needed you to know. In case you were still wondering why I wanted you to stay. He went inside, leaving Clara alone with her racing heart and the sudden terrifying realization that she had fallen in love with Josiah Callahan. She had no idea what to do about it. The peace shattered 3 days later. Sammy had gone missing. Clara was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Hetty burst through the door, her face pale. "The boy. Have you seen him?" "Not since breakfast. He said he was going to draw by the creek." "Creek's empty." Silas checked. "Joe's riding out now, but the boy's been gone at least 2 hours." Clara's blood turned to ice. 2 hours. Biscuit's missing too. Dog never leaves that boy's side. Clara was already moving, grabbing her shawl, her heart pounding. Where else could he be? The barn? The far pasture? Men are checking everywhere. But Clara... Hetty's voice dropped. Dalton's wagon was seen on the road this morning, heading this direction. The implication hit Clara like a physical blow. Dalton, the man who had threatened Sammy, who had said accidents happened. No. Clara pushed past Hetty and ran outside. Joe was mounting his horse, his face a mask of controlled fury. "I'm coming with you," Clara called. "Stay here in case he comes back." "Joe, if Dalton has him..." "I'll handle Dalton." His voice was deadly. "If that man touched a hair on my nephew's head, I'll kill him with my bare hands." He spurred his horse and rode off before Clara could argue. She stood in the yard, helpless, her mind racing through every terrible possibility. An hour passed, then 2. The sun reached its peak and began its descent. Clara paced the porch, unable to sit, unable to eat, unable to do anything but pray. Then she heard it. Barking, distant but getting closer. Biscuit came tearing around the side of the barn, tongue lolling, tail wagging. Behind him, limping but alive, was Sammy. Clara flew down the steps and caught the boy in her arms, holding him so tight she feared she might hurt him. "Sammy!" "Oh, thank God. Are you hurt? What happened?" The boy was crying, his face dirty, his shirt torn. "I'm sorry, Miss Clara. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare everyone." "What happened? Where were you?" "I found a shortcut through the rocks. Wanted to draw the wild horses in the valley, but I slipped and fell and my ankle got stuck between 2 rocks. Couldn't get out. Biscuit stayed with me the whole time, but he couldn't move the rocks neither." Clara examined his ankle, swollen and bruised, but not broken. "So Dalton didn't..." "Who's Dalton?" Relief washed over Clara so powerfully she almost collapsed. "Never mind, sweetheart. Never mind. Let's get you inside." She half carried him into the house, cleaned his wounds, wrapped his ankle, and made him soup. By the time Joe returned, Sammy was resting in bed, Biscuit curled at his feet. Joe burst through this door, wild-eyed. "The boy? He's safe. In his room. It wasn't Dalton. He got his ankle stuck between some rocks in the valley." Joe sagged against the doorframe, all the fury draining from his body. For a moment, he looked like he might fall down. "He's all right. Shaken and sore, but fine. He'll be back to causing trouble in a few days." Joe moved past her without a word, striding down the hallway to Sammy's room. Clara followed at a distance, watching as he knelt beside the boy's bed and gathered his nephew in his arms. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," Joe said, his voice rough. "You hear me? You're all I got, boy." "I'm sorry, Uncle Joe. I didn't mean to." I know. Joe held him tight. "Just tell someone next time. Tell Clara or Hetty or me. We can't protect you if we don't know where you are." Clara backed away, giving them privacy. But as she turned, she heard Sammy's voice. "Uncle Joe, I wasn't scared even when I was stuck. You know why?" "Why?" "Because I knew you'd come find me. You and Miss Clara. That's what family does." Clara's eyes blurred with tears as she retreated to the kitchen. Family. The boy had called them family. Later that night, when the house was quiet and Sammy was sleeping soundly, Joe found Clara on the porch again. Without a word, he sat down beside her, closer than he had before. Their shoulders nearly touched. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here when he came back, for taking care of him." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." He turned to face her. Clara, when I thought something had happened to him, when I thought Dalton might have... All I could think about was how I failed him. How I failed Sarah and Thomas. How everyone I love ends up... Stop. Clara put her hand on his arm. You didn't fail anyone. You're not failing anyone. That boy adores you. He stayed calm because he knew you'd come for him. That's not failure, that's love. Joe stared at her hand on his arm. Then slowly he covered it with his own. Clara. Yes. I know you came here to escape something. I know you weren't planning to stay. But I need you to know. He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easy. I need you to know that you've changed this place. Changed us. Sammy's laughing again. Hetty's singing while she works. And I... He took a breath. I don't dread waking up anymore. Clara's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he could hear it. What are you saying, Joe? I'm saying I'm not ready to lose you. His grip on her hand tightened. I'm saying that whatever the town thinks, whatever Dalton does, whatever letters come from Missouri, I want you here. Not as a housekeeper. Not as hired help. Then as what? Joe looked at her, and Clara saw everything in his eyes. Every wall he had built since Sarah's death crumbling down. Every fear, every hope, every tender feeling he had tried to bury. As family, he said, as mine. Clara's breath caught. Joe? But before she could answer, the sound of galloping hooves shattered the moment. They sprang apart as Silas Brown rode up his horse lathered with sweat. Boss, you need to come quick. Dalton's men are cutting fences in the north pasture. Cattle are scattering everywhere. Joe's face hardened. He stood, his hand falling away from Clara's. How many men? At least 6, armed. Joe strode toward the barn. Get the rifles. Wake Hank and Morrison. We're ending this tonight. Clara followed him. Joe, wait. It could be a trap. Probably is. He grabbed a rifle from the rack and began loading it. But I can't let him destroy everything my family built. Then let me help. Joe paused. You ever fired a gun? My daddy taught me when I was 12. I can hit a target at 50 yards. He studied her for a long moment, then handed her a rifle. Stay by the house. Anyone comes who ain't us. You shoot first and ask questions later. Can you do that? Clara took the rifle, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. I can. Joe nodded once, something fierce and proud in his eyes. Then he mounted his horse and rode into the darkness, leaving Clara standing guard over the home she had finally claimed as her own. She would die before she let anyone take it from her. The gunshots started an hour before dawn. Clara stood on the porch, rifle in hand, straining to see through the darkness. Each crack of gunfire made her flinch, her mind racing with images of Joe falling from his horse, Joe bleeding in the dirt, Joe never coming back. Sammy appeared in the doorway behind her, his face pale. Miss Clara, what's happening? Get back inside, sweetheart. Stay in your room with Biscuit. But Uncle Joe... Your uncle can handle himself. But he needs to know you're safe. Can you be brave for him? The boy hesitated, then nodded. He retreated into the house and Clara heard his door close. Hetty came up beside her, a shotgun cradled in her arms. Sounds like it's coming from the north pasture. That's a good 3 miles out. Too far to help. Ain't nothing we can do but wait and pray. Hetty's jaw was tight. And shoot anyone stupid enough to come this way. They waited. The gunfire grew sporadic, then stopped entirely. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Clara's hands were shaking. She gripped the rifle tighter, trying to steady herself. He'll come back, Hetty said quietly. Joe Callahan survived worse than Victor Dalton. You don't know that. I know that man. Known him since he was younger than Sammy. He's got more fight in him than 10 ordinary men. Hetty paused. Especially now. Now that he's got something worth fighting for. Clara looked at her. What do you mean? The older woman's eyes softened. I mean you, girl. Can't you see the way that man looks at you like you're the first sunrise he's seen in 3 years? Before Clara could respond, the sound of hooves reached them. multiple horses coming fast. Clara raised her rifle. Hetty did the same. The first rider emerged from the darkness, and Clara's heart nearly stopped. Joe. He was alive. Dusty and exhausted, but alive. Behind him rode Silas and two other ranch hands, all of them looking worse for wear, but intact. Clara lowered her rifle and ran to meet him as he dismounted. "Joe!" "Thank God. I heard the shooting and I thought, I'm all right." His voice was rough. He reached out and touched her face just briefly, as if reassuring himself she was real. "Dalton's men scattered once the sheriff showed up. Turns out one of our neighbors saw the whole thing and rode to town for help. And Dalton—" Joe's expression darkened. "Sheriff arrested two of his men. Got them to confess Dalton hired them to destroy my property. He's in jail right now waiting to be transferred to the territorial prison." Clara sagged with relief. "It's over. It's over." Joe's hand was still on her face. "We won, Clara." Behind them, Silas cleared his throat awkwardly. "Boss, I'm gonna see to the horses." Joe didn't seem to hear him. His eyes were fixed on Clara's face. "I meant what I said earlier. Before all this, I meant every word." "Joe, I know it's too soon. I know you've got every reason not to trust another man after what you've been through. But I need you to know that I ain't Edmund. I ain't gonna stand by while someone tears you down. I'll fight for you, Clara. I'll fight for us." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I don't need you to fight for me. I know you don't. You can fight your own battles just fine. But you shouldn't have to do it alone anymore. Neither of us should." He pulled her close, then wrapping his arms around her, like she was something precious. Clara buried her face in his chest, breathing in the smell of gunpowder and sweat and him, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. She felt safe. When they finally pulled apart, Hetty was watching from the porch with a satisfied smile. "About time," she called out. "I was starting to think I'd have to knock your heads together." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Clara was preparing breakfast when she heard a wagon pull up. She looked out the window and froze. A woman was climbing down from the wagon. A woman with silver hair, expensive clothes, and a face Clara knew all too well. Harriet Harwell. Clara's blood ran cold. She gripped the counter, trying to steady herself. "Clara." Joe appeared in the doorway. "What's wrong?" "She's here." "Who?" "My mother-in-law. Former mother-in-law." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Harriet Harwell." Joe's expression hardened. He strode to the door and stepped outside, positioning himself between the approaching woman and his house. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Harriet stopped, clearly unprepared to be confronted by a man of Joe's size and presence. "I'm here to speak with Clara Whitmore." "That's so. And what business would you have with Miss Whitmore?" "Family business." Harriet's chin lifted. "I'm her mother-in-law." "Former mother-in-law, from what I understand. The way Clara tells it, she ain't part of your family anymore. Your son made sure of that." Harriet's eyes narrowed. "You must be the rancher, the one harboring her." "I ain't harboring anyone. Clara works here by choice and stays here by her own free will. Something you Harwells don't seem to understand." Clara forced herself to walk outside. Her legs felt weak, but she made them carry her anyway. "What do you want, Harriet?" The older woman's eyes swept over Clara, taking in her simple dress, her work-worn hands, her life on this ranch. "I came to offer you a chance to come home." "I am home." "Don't be ridiculous. Living on a cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere, playing house with some widower and his orphan nephew." Harriet's voice dripped with contempt. "This isn't you, Clara." "No. This is exactly me. This is who I was before your family tried to break me down." Clara stepped forward. "You came all the way from Missouri to bring me back." "Why, Edmund's already told the whole county I'm defective. What use could I possibly be to you now?" Harriet's composure cracked just slightly. "Edmund is struggling. Without a wife to manage the household, things have fallen apart. He realizes now that perhaps the situation was handled poorly. Poorly, Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your son sat silent while you humiliated me in front of 12 people. He told me I was the problem. He let me walk out that door without a single word in my defense. And now he's struggling. He wants you back, Clara. Well, he can't have me. You would choose this. Harriet gestured at the ranch. Over everything we offered you. The Harwell name, the estate, the position in society. Yes. Clara's voice was clear and steady. I would choose honest work over empty status. I would choose people who see my worth over people who only see my womb. And I would choose a man who defends me over a man who can't even look me in the eye. Joe moved to stand beside Clara, his presence solid and unwavering. Think she's made herself clear, ma'am. Time for you to leave. Harriet looked between them, and something shifted in her expression. For a moment, Clara thought she saw a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even regret. But then, Harriet's face hardened again. You'll regret this, she said. Both of you. When the novelty wears off, and you realize what you've given up. The only thing I gave up was a life of being told I wasn't enough. Clara reached for Joe's hand and held it tight. Turns out I was always enough. I just needed to find the people who could see it. Harriet stared at their joined hands. Then, without another word, she turned and climbed back onto her wagon. Goodbye, Harriet, Clara called out. Don't come back. The wagon rolled away, carrying with it the last remnants of Clara's old life. She watched until it disappeared down the road, then let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 5 years. You all right? Joe asked softly. Better than all right. Clara turned to face him. I think I just closed a door. I should have closed a long time ago. Joe squeezed her hand. You know you were pretty impressive just now. I learned from you. You showed me what it looks like when someone stands their ground. I just showed you the door. You're the one who walked through it. From inside the house came the sound of small footsteps. Sammy appeared on the porch, Biscuit at his heels. Who was that lady, Miss Clara? Clara looked at the boy, at his worried face, at the fear in his eyes that someone might take her away. Nobody important, she said. Just a ghost from my past. And ghosts don't have any power over the living. Sammy considered this. Uncle Joe says the same thing about bad memories. He says we can remember without letting them hurt us anymore. Your uncle is a wise man. He's pretty smart sometimes, Sammy agreed. For a grown-up. Joe ruffled the boy's hair. Thanks for the endorsement, kid. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch together, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Sammy was between them. Biscuit curled at his feet, chattering about the drawing he wanted to make of the sunset. Clara listened with half an ear, her mind wandering through everything that had happened since she arrived at this ranch. She had come here broken, convinced she was worthless, certain that her best years were behind her. Now she knew better. Miss Clara. Yes, sweetheart. Can I ask you something? Of course. Sammy fidgeted his hands, twisting in his lap. Are you going to marry Uncle Joe? Clara felt her face flush. Beside her, Joe went very still. Why do you ask? Because I heard Hetty telling Silas that it was only a matter of time, and I wanted to know if it was true. Joe cleared his throat. Sammy, that's not really... Because if it is true, the boy continued, I think it would be good. You make Uncle Joe smile. He didn't used to smile much before you came. And you make really good biscuits. And Biscuit likes you, and Biscuit doesn't like just anyone. Clara's heart swelled so full she thought it might burst. Those are very good reasons, she said carefully. So, is it true? Clara looked at Joe. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, but his eyes were warm. I don't know yet, she admitted. But I can tell you this, I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, this is my home now. You're my family now. Does that answer your question? Sammy thought about it, then nodded. I guess so. But if you do get married, can I be in the wedding? I've never been in a wedding before. Joe laughed a real laugh that came from somewhere deep. Tell you what, kid. If we get married, you can be the best man. How's that? What's a best man? The most important person at the wedding besides the bride and groom. Sammy's face lit up. Really? Really? The boy jumped up and ran inside, calling for Hetty to tell her the news. Biscuit followed, tail wagging. Clara and Joe sat alone in the fading light, the question Sammy had asked hanging between them. He's not wrong, you know, Joe said quietly. About the biscuits. About me not smiling much before you came. He turned to face her. Clara, I know it's only been a couple months. I know you've got every reason to take things slow, but I need you to know that when that boy asked about marriage, my first thought wasn't that it was too soon. My first thought was, I hope so. Clara's breath caught. Joe, I'm not asking you right now. I'm just telling you where I stand. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. And if you're never ready, if this is all we ever are, I'll still be grateful for every day I get with you. Clara reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Ask me, she said. Joe blinked. What? Ask me, not someday. Not when I'm ready. Ask me now. Clara, are you sure? After everything you've been through, I don't want to rush. Joe Callahan. Clara turned to face him fully. For 5 years, I waited for someone to choose me, to see me, to love me for who I am instead of what I could give them. I'm done waiting. I know what I want. I know who I want. So ask me. Joe stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he slid off the porch and knelt in the dirt before her. I don't have a ring, he said. I don't have pretty words or poetry. All I have is this ranch, that boy inside, and a heart that's been broken but still works well enough to love you. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Clara looked at this man, this quiet, steady, fierce man who had given her a home when she had nowhere to go, who had defended her when no one else would, who had shown her what it meant to be valued. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Joe rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the tenderness and passion of a man who had finally found his way home. Inside the house, Sammy pressed his face to the window and let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the Wyoming plains. Hetty appeared beside him, a rare smile on her weathered face. Told you, she said. Just a matter of time. The wedding was set for the last Saturday of August. Clara woke that morning to the sound of Sammy's feet pounding down the hallway, followed by Biscuit's excited barking. Miss Clara! Miss Clara! Wake up, it's your wedding day. She smiled and pulled the quilt up to her chin. I'm awake, sweetheart. The door burst open, and Sammy stood there in his nightshirt, his hair sticking up in 12 different directions. Hetty says you need to eat breakfast, and then she's going to help you with your dress, and then Pastor Williams is coming at noon, and Uncle Joe isn't allowed to see you until the ceremony, because it's bad luck, and... Breathe, Sammy. The boy stopped, took a dramatic breath and grinned. I'm just excited. I've never been a best man before. And you're going to be the finest best man Wyoming Territory has ever seen. Sammy's chest puffed with pride. Uncle Joe said I get to hold the ring. He showed me last night. It was his mother's ring. He said she would have wanted you to have it. Clara's throat tightened. Joe had told her about the ring, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother for 40 years. The fact that he wanted her to wear it meant more than any diamond ever could. That's very special, Sammy. I know. That's why I'm not going to lose it. He patted his pocket. I practiced all night. See, still there. Clara laughed. I have complete faith in you. Hetty appeared in the doorway, shooing Sammy away. Go get dressed, boy, and stay away from the mud puddles. I spent an hour pressing that shirt of yours. Yes, ma'am. He ran off Biscuit at his heels, leaving Clara alone with Hetty. The older woman stood there for a moment, her expression softer than Clara had ever seen it. "You ready for this?" Clara sat up in bed. "I think I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know it." "Good answer." Hetty moved to the wardrobe and pulled out the dress they had worked on together for the past 2 weeks. It was simple, but beautiful white cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Nothing like the elaborate gown she had worn for her first wedding. This dress felt like her, simple, honest, real. "Joe's been up since before dawn," Hetty said as she laid out the dress. "Man's nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs." "Joe nervous. Don't let that stoic face fool you. I caught him practicing his vows in the barn this morning. Nearly fell over a hay bale when he saw me watching." Clara couldn't help but smile. The image of Joe, big and solid and unshakable, stumbling over hay bales because he was nervous about marrying her, filled her with a warmth she couldn't describe. "He's a good man," she said quietly. "Best man I know. And you're the best thing that's happened to him since Sarah passed." Hetty paused. "Maybe the best thing that's ever happened to him, period. Don't tell him I said that." "I wouldn't dare." The morning passed in a blur of preparations. Hetty helped Clara into her dress, pinned her hair up with wildflowers from the garden, and declared her fit to be a bride. Sammy ran in and out providing updates on the arriving guests and Joe's continued state of nervous pacing. Neighbors Clara had never met arrived throughout the morning, bringing food and flowers and congratulations. Even some of the townspeople who had whispered about her came, their expressions tentative but genuine. Mrs. Whitley was not among them. Clara didn't mind. At noon, Pastor Williams arrived, a kindly man with white hair and a gentle voice. He set up near the big oak tree where Joe and Sarah had been married, a detail that Joe had shared with Clara the night before. "Are you sure?" she had asked. "I don't want to intrude on her memory." "It ain't intruding," Joe had said. "It's continuing. Sarah would have wanted this tree to see more love, not less." Now, standing at the window of her room, Clara watched the guests gather near that oak tree. She saw Silas Brown in a clean shirt, Hetty taking her seat in the front row, neighbors and ranch hands filling in the spaces. And then she saw Joe. He stood beneath the oak tree in his best clothes, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on the house. Even from this distance she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept shifting his weight. Nervous. He was actually nervous. Clara's heart swelled. A knock came at her door. "Miss Clara, it's time." She took one last look in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was not the broken creature who had fled Missouri 3 months ago. This woman had fire in her eyes and peace in her heart. This woman knew her worth. "Coming," she said. She walked out of the house and into the summer sun. The guests rose as she appeared, but Clara barely noticed them. Her eyes found Joe and everything else faded away. He was looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. His eyes glistened, and he didn't try to hide it. Clara walked toward him, her steps steady, her heart full. Sammy stood beside his uncle, the ring clutched in his small fist, his face split in the biggest grin she had ever seen. When she reached the oak tree, Joe reached for her hands. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "You're not so bad yourself." Pastor Williams cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was simple, as Clara and Joe had wanted. No elaborate rituals, no endless readings. Just two people standing before God and their community promising to love each other for the rest of their days. "Do you, Josiah Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" Joe's eyes never left Clara's face. "I do." "And do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain, the rejection, the long miles of self-doubt. And then she thought about the man standing before her, the boy bouncing on his toes beside them, the home they had built together. "I do," she said, "with all my heart." "The ring, please." Sammy stepped forward, his hand outstretched, the gold band gleaming in his palm. "I didn't lose it," he announced proudly. Laughter rippled through the guests. Joe took the ring and slid it onto Clara's finger. "This ring belonged to my mother," he said. "She wore it for 40 years and never once took it off. She told me once that the ring wasn't the promise. It was just a reminder of the promise. The real promise lives here." He placed his hand over his heart. "And here." He placed his other hand over Clara's heart. "I promise you, Clara, every day, for the rest of my life." Clara's eyes blurred with tears. She had no ring to give him in return, but she had something else. "I don't have a ring for you," she said, "but I have words. When I came to this ranch, I was convinced I had nothing left to offer. I believed I was broken beyond repair. You showed me I was wrong. You showed me that my worth isn't measured by what I couldn't give, but by who I am. You and Sammy gave me a family when I thought I'd lost the chance for one forever." She paused, steadying her voice. "I promise you, Joe, every day, for the rest of my life." Pastor William smiled. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Joe pulled her close and kissed her with a tenderness that made Clara's knees weak. Around them, the guests cheered and clapped. Sammy threw his arms around both of them, squeezing tight. "We're a real family now," he shouted. "A real official family." Joe lifted the boy onto his hip, keeping his other arm around Clara. "We were always a real family, kid. Now we just got the paper to prove it." The celebration lasted well into the evening. There was food and music and dancing under the stars. Neighbors who had once whispered about Clara now congratulated her with genuine warmth. The tide had turned slowly but surely. As the night wore on, Clara found herself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching her new family. Sammy was teaching Biscuit to dance, much to the dog's confusion. Hetty was laughing at something Silas said, her face transformed by joy. And Joe was making his way toward her, 2 glasses of cider in his hands. "You look like you're a million miles away," he said, handing her a glass. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how different my life is now. 3 months ago, I was standing on a train platform, convinced I was worthless. Now I'm standing here watching my husband and my son and my family, and I can't quite believe it's real." Joe slipped his arm around her waist. "It's real, I promise." "I know." She leaned into him. "That's the miracle of it." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the celebration continue. "Joe. Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For really seeing me when everyone else looked right through me." Joe turned her to face him. "Clara, I've got something to tell you. Something I've been thinking about for a while now." Her heart quickened. "What is it?" "When you first came here, I told myself I was just hiring a housekeeper. That's all it was going to be, a business arrangement." He paused. "But then I watched you with Sammy. I watched you stand up to Gertrude Whitley. I watched you burn that letter from your past and choose to stay. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't just hiring a housekeeper. I was finding my way back to life." Clara's eyes glistened. "After Sarah died, I shut down. Stopped feeling much of anything. Thought it was safer that way. But you woke something up in me. Made me remember that life is meant to be lived, not just endured." He cupped her face in his hands. "You saved me, Clara, just as much as I saved you." She kissed him then, not caring who was watching. When they finally pulled apart, Sammy was standing beside them with an exaggerated look of disgust. "Are you two going to do that all the time now?" "Probably," Joe said. Sammy sighed dramatically. "I guess I can get used to it. But not at breakfast. I don't want to see kissing at breakfast." "Deal." Clara laughed. As the night wound down and the guests began to leave, Clara helped Hetty clean up while Joe carried a sleeping Sammy to bed. The boy had finally run out of energy, collapsing on a hay bale with Biscuit curled beside him. Hetty worked in silence for a while, then spoke. "You know, when you first showed up here, I gave you 2 weeks. Figured you'd be gone before the month was out. And now? Now I think you might just outlast us all." Hetty paused in her work. "I'm glad I was wrong about you. That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Don't get used to it." But she was smiling as she said it. Later, when the house was quiet and Sammy was tucked into bed, Clara and Joe sat on the porch together. The stars stretched endlessly above them, and the night air was warm with the last breath of summer. "What are you thinking about Mrs. Callahan?" Clara smiled at the sound of her new name. "I'm thinking about something Sammy said a few weeks ago, about how home isn't a place, it's a feeling. His ma used to say that. I understand it now. For so long I thought home was a house, a position, a role I had to fill. But it's not. Home is this." She gestured to the ranch, to him, to everything they had built. "Home is belonging." Joe took her hand and laced his fingers through hers. "You belong here, Clara. You always did. You just had to find your way. The long way around. Some journeys are like that. Doesn't make them less valuable, makes them more." They sat in silence for a while, content to simply exist together. Joe. "Yes. I need to tell you something." He turned to look at her, his expression curious. "When I was married to Edmund, I spent 5 years believing there was something wrong with me. That I was broken. Defective. All those words his mother used." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I carried that belief with me when I left. I carried it onto the train across the prairie all the way to your front porch. And now I know the truth. There was never anything wrong with me. There was something wrong with the people who couldn't see my value." She met his eyes. "You taught me that. You and Sammy. You showed me that love doesn't require perfection. It just requires presence." Joe squeezed her hand. "The day you walked onto this ranch, I saw a woman who was carrying more weight than any person should have to carry alone. I didn't know your story yet, but I knew you were strong. Stronger than you realized. I didn't feel strong. That's the thing about strength. Sometimes it looks like fighting. Sometimes it looks like standing your ground. But sometimes it looks like getting up every morning and trying again, even when everything inside you wants to give up." He lifted her hand and kissed it. "You did that, every single day. That's strength, Clara." The words settled into her heart, filling spaces that had been empty for far too long. "I used to pray for a child," she admitted. "I thought that was the only way my life would have meaning, the only way I could prove I was worth something. And now I have Sammy. And I love that boy, as if he came from my own body. Blood doesn't make a family, Joe. Choice does. Love does. That's something Sarah used to say too. She would have liked you, Clara. I know she's watching somewhere, glad that this house is full of love again." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think she'd approve of us?" "I know she would. Sarah had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. She'd see how happy you make me and Sammy, and she'd say it was exactly right." He paused. "She told me once before she died that if something happened to her, she wanted me to find happiness again. Made me promise I wouldn't close myself off. I didn't keep that promise very well at first, but then you came along. I'm glad she made you promise." "Me too." The weeks that followed the wedding settled into a rhythm of quiet contentment. Clara officially took over management of the household, and the ranch flourished under the combined efforts of the small family they had built. Sammy started calling her Ma one morning at breakfast, casual, as anything as if he had always done it. Clara's heart nearly stopped. "Sammy, you don't have to." "I know," he said, mouth full of biscuit. "But I want to. Is that okay?" She looked at Joe, who was watching with suspiciously bright eyes. That's more than okay, she said. That's perfect. The gossip in town eventually died down, replaced by newer scandals and fresher targets. Mrs. Whitley still refused to acknowledge Clara when they crossed paths, but Clara found she didn't care. She had everything she needed right here on this ranch. One afternoon in late September, a letter arrived from Missouri. Clara recognized Edmund's handwriting immediately. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, but there was no fear this time. Just curiosity. She read it at the kitchen table while Sammy practiced his letters nearby. Clara's mother passed away last week. Heart failure, the doctor said. I thought you should know. The estate is in chaos without her running things. I've realized too late how much I depended on her, and before that, how much I depended on you. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I wanted to say that I'm sorry. Not because I want you back, I know that ship has sailed, but because you deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved to be defended. You deserved to be loved. I was too weak to give you either. I hope you found happiness wherever you are. Edmund. Clara read the letter twice, then set it down on the table. Harriet was dead. The woman who had made her life miserable for 5 years, who had called her defective and worthless, who had chased her across the country with letters full of poison, she was gone. Clara expected to feel something. Triumph, maybe. Or relief. Or vindication. Instead, she felt only a quiet sadness. Not for Harriet, but for the years she had lost believing the things that woman said about her. Ma, are you okay? She looked up at Sammy at his worried face and smiled. I'm okay, sweetheart. Just got some news from back east. Bad news? No, just old news, from a life that isn't mine anymore. She folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. Later, she would show it to Joe. They would talk about it, process it together. That was how they did things now. Can we make apple pie tonight? Sammy asked. Hetty brought apples from the orchard. Apple pie sounds perfect. When Joe came in for supper that evening, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and brown sugar. Sammy was setting the table with exaggerated care, explaining to Biscuit why dogs couldn't eat at the table with people. Something smells amazing, Joe said, kissing Clara's cheek. Apple pie, your favorite. You spoil me. You deserve spoiling. Later, after Sammy was in bed and the dishes were done, Clara showed Joe the letter. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable. How do you feel? He asked finally. Strangely peaceful. I thought hearing she was gone would feel like victory, but it doesn't. It just feels like closure. And Edmund. I feel sorry for him, actually. He's going to spend the rest of his life realizing what he lost. Not me specifically, but the chance to be a better man. That's its own kind of punishment. Joe set the letter down and pulled her close. You're a more forgiving person than I am. I'm not forgiving them. I'm just not carrying them anymore. There's a difference. That's wisdom right there, Mrs. Callahan. She smiled against his chest. I learned from the best. The first frost came in October, and with it, a sense of completion that settled over the ranch like a benediction. Clara stood on the porch one morning wrapped in a shawl Sarah had made years ago, watching Sammy chase Biscuit across the yard. Joe came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Happy? He asked. More than I ever thought possible. Good, because I've got something to tell you. She turned in his arms. What? Silas is thinking about retiring next year. Wants to go live with his daughter in California. Joe paused. I was thinking about expanding the herd, hiring a few more hands. Building this place into something Sammy can inherit someday. That sounds wonderful. There's more. He took a breath. I was also thinking, if you're open to it, we might consider taking in some of the orphans from the territorial home. Kids who need a family like Sammy did, like we all did in our own way. Clara's heart swelled. Joe, I know you came here thinking you couldn't have children, But watching you with Sammy, I realized something. Motherhood isn't about biology. It's about love. And you've got more love to give than anyone I've ever met." Tears streamed down Clara's face. "You want to take in orphans? I want to build a family. A big, messy, complicated family full of kids who need what we have to give. If you're willing." Clara threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, yes." From across the yard, Sammy's voice carried on the wind. "Mappa, look what Biscuit learned." Clara pulled back from Joe's embrace and wiped her eyes. "Coming, sweetheart." They walked across the yard together, hand in hand, toward their son and their dog and their future. The woman who had been told she could never be a mother was about to become mother to many. The man who had lost everything was building something new. The boy who had been orphaned was gaining siblings. And the ranch that had once echoed with grief now rang with laughter. Some people spend their whole lives searching for belonging, never realizing that belonging isn't found. It's created. It's built day by day, choice by choice, from the raw materials of love and courage, and the willingness to try again after every failure. Clara Callahan understood this now. She understood that her worth had never been tied to her womb or her husband's approval or society's expectations. Her worth was inherent, unshakable, written into the very fabric of her being. She had just needed to find the people who could see it. Standing in the Wyoming sun, surrounded by the family she had chosen and the life she had built, Clara finally understood the truth that had eluded her for so many years. She was not broken. She had never been broken. She was simply waiting for the right people to recognize her as the gift she had always been. And now, at last, she was home.